Hey, can everybody hear me? I'm not sure if this microphone is working. It seems to be. Well, welcome everyone to breakout session B, which is the duties of an offshore company or nominee director. Are they held to a lesser standard? My name is Simon Dickson. I'm a partner at Mourant, Ozannes in the Cayman Islands, where my particular focus is on insolvency and restructuring. I'm delighted to share the platform with two distinguished speakers this afternoon, Claire Robey and Krys. Claire has a CV that would put most of us in this room to shame. She's a barrister specializing in international commercial litigation, asset tracing, insolvency and company law. She read law at Oxford, obtaining the highest first in her year, and then went on to do the BCL before practicing at the bar in London. She moved to the BVI in 2008, and now she's a lawyer at Harneys, where she's appeared in a number of high-profile cases, including Westford Special Situations Fund Limited and Barfield Nominees. She is also one of the contributing editors to Harneys' book on BVI commercial law and has written and spoken widely on the subject. With a first-class degree from Oxford, I'm sure she won't mind if Ken and I pass on the more difficult questions to her. Ken, of course, needs little introduction. He's a licensed insolvency practitioner and the founder and CEO of Krys Global, which has offices in Cayman, the BVI, Bahamas, Bermuda and Guernsey. Ken has been involved in a number of high-profile cases over the years, including BCCI, Sphinx and Fairfield Sentry. In a former life, Ken was the head of compliance at the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority, and he's also a keen ultra-marathon runner and started the off-the-beaten-track trail run in the Cayman Islands. I wonder if we could close the door before we go too much further to try and keep the noise out. Thank you. All right, so moving on to the business of the day, we're going to look at the duties of an offshore company and nominee directors and ask the question whether they're held to a lesser standard. So for the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to talk about the duties of directors of English and Cayman companies. I'm going to talk about the key differences between the English and Cayman regime. I'm going to talk about possible developments in the Cayman Islands. Then Claire is going to discuss the position in the BVI and some recent decisions in the BVI and the Cayman Islands. And then we're going to conclude with Ken, who is going to discuss practical issues a liquidator encounters with directors of an offshore company. Okay, so turning to the duties of a director, I think broadly speaking the message that I have is that the duties owed by directors of Cayman companies and those owed by directors of English companies are broadly the same. And for the sake of convenience, we can break them down into three categories, namely fiduciary duties, duties of care and skill, and other statutory duties. Well, we're all familiar with the concept of fiduciary duties. Directors are in a position of trust vis-à-vis their companies, and accordingly they owe those companies fiduciary duties, which are essentially duties of honesty and good faith. Now, prior to the Companies Act 2006, the position in England and Cayman was essentially the same, in that the duties arose under the English common law, which for all intents and purposes the Cayman Islands adopted. In England, however, the duties of directors were codified by sections 171 to 177 of the Companies Act, as set out on the slide. Now, in most respects, codification has not altered the underlying common law duties. Indeed, section 178 of the Act says that a breach under the company's law is the same as would apply if the corresponding common law rule or equitable principle applied, which is perhaps proof, if proof were needed, that codification has done little to modify the common law position. It's fair to note that codification has changed some of the duties slightly. For example, the codified duty to promote the success of the company is arguably more prescriptive than the common law position has been. However, aside from some relatively superficial changes, the position in England under the Companies Act and the position in Cayman remains practically the same. Now, there is some debate in Cayman as to whether the director's duties should be codified. And it could be argued that by codifying directors' duties, it would bring clarity and it would improve standards of corporate government. governance rather. In my view, this is something of a red herring. It should be remembered that we're dealing with settled concepts and that any director, and in particular a professional director, should be very familiar with the issues, and we live in an age where guidance on duties is easily and quickly obtainable. I think it should also be remembered that duties of directors have evolved over the years due to careful consideration of the changing commercial context. In my view, these changes are much better left to the commercial court, which is familiar with the business and the context in which these duties are discharged, as opposed to Parliament or the legislative, which has less practical experience and doesn't have the luxury of dealing with these issues on a case-by-case basis. Turning then to duties of care and skill, or skill and care, depending which way you want to put it. I think most of us in the room will be familiar with the City Equitable case and what is set out there as what the requisite common law duty of skill and care is. I mean, these duties are pretty much the same as those discussed by Mr. Justice Jones in his Weavering judgment some 87 years on from the City case. And Claire will deal with Weavering in a moment. However, the Weavering judgment is an ample demonstration that the common law position in Cayman is the same as the common law position